We're so excited to be hosting this Pathways to Resilience webinar, using science to promote healing and resilience in states and community, and to have an amazing panel with us today. I will start by quickly introducing myself, but really want to get to the meat of the work that they're doing. So I'm Rachel Gilgoff. I'm a child abuse pediatrician and integrative medicine specialist by training, focusing on program curriculum development, science writing, and research. I'm currently an advisor with the ACEs Aware Initiative in California and on the expert advisory committee for the Pathways to Resilience initiative. I know people have heard me say this before, but it was Dr. Bruce Perry's book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, that led me to my career change. And so it's a really special honor and privilege for me today to be facilitating such an amazing panel. So I'm going to start by turning the mic over to Dr. Bruce Perry, and then Amy Meyertholen and Dr. Elaine Rankin to introduce themselves. Thank you, guys.
My name is Bruce Perry. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I'm part of a community of clinicians and programs. We refer to ourselves as the Neurosequential Network, and two of the key members of that group are with us. Dr. Elaine Rankin, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Elaine Rankin, and I am a behavior specialist and the Neurosequential Model coordinator for the Cottonwood Oak Creek School District in Central Arizona. Amy?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Meyertholen. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Arizona Council of Human Service Providers. My background is in social work. I have my MSW. And I am pleased to have been working with the Neurosequential Network for 4 years now. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you so much for being on our panel, and thank you to everyone on this Zoom call for being here with us today. I'm going to ask our panelists about 4 questions, and then we'll turn it over to all of you to get to ask some of your questions as well. So the first question is for Dr. Bruce Perry, and that is, Dr. Perry, could you please provide us an overview of the neurosequential model approach? And I know you have some slides for us.
Yes, I am a physician and I am slide dependent. So I'm going to rely on these to talk a little bit about what we do. The first thing I want to do is put up basically a set of links where you can get some more information. Probably the easiest one probably is the handouts one right here in the middle. There are a number of downloadable PDFs that have images and information about the model, and if any of you are interested, you can go here. So the neurosequential model is essentially, it is an approach to doing initially clinical work, where we were trying to integrate some of the core concepts and principles about how the brain works and changes into clinical practice. And so 20 years or so ago, I felt pretty unhappy basically with my ability as a clinician to understand and work with children who've been impacted by trauma. The existing kind of medical model and DSM didn't adequately capture what I was seeing. So being trained as a neuroscientist and as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I started to filter in some of the things I knew about the brain into our clinical work. And over time, evolved this into an exportable approach to clinical problem solving, which we basically call the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics, NMT. Now, what the NMT does, and I'll talk about this in a minute, it really helps you look at the developmental history of a person, the timing and the nature of adversities, and the timing and the nature of buffering positive experiences. Relational connection is prominent in that. And then look at current functioning of an individual and use that information to assist in your treatment planning. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. But one of the things that we knew right from the outset, and we think it's really important to emphasize, is that all models are wrong. You know, every approach that you will hear about and every approach that exists is trying to address a set of issues. And usually when you're talking about human beings and complex human problems, we're talking about physiological systems in the body. We're talking about sociological processes. We're talking about transgenerational historical phenomenon, all of which combine in a complex way that really overwhelm the ability of any single framework to adequately capture. And so I just, before we go too far, I want you to appreciate that we recognize that the NMT and the neurosequential model globally is a model, and that there are a variety of heuristics or teaching tools that we use so that we can try to capture some of these concepts in ways that don't dilute them too much and that allow us to do better work for the people we're interacting with, whether it's students in the neurosequential model of education, or whether it's caregivers in the neurosequential model of caregiving, or whether it's clinicians and families that work with clinicians in the neurosequential model of therapeutics. And so over the years, we've evolved this, if you will, this clinical process to help us look at the current functional capability of an individual. And all of this is predicated on using a heuristic, a model of the brain, which is this upside down triangle that some of you may have seen. And this is one of the versions of that. And the bottom line is, this is just a diagram of the brain. It's indicating basically that there's a hierarchical organization to the brain, that certain functional capabilities emerge from neural networks that are localized in certain parts of the brain, and that as you go from lower parts of the brain to higher parts of the brain, you get increasingly complex functions, such that the cortex is the part of the human body that's most uniquely human. And the most uniquely human functions are mediated by the cortex. Now, the reason this turns out to be really important in understanding trauma is that there are a set of really important core regulatory networks that originate in lower parts of the brain that go literally collectively every part of the body and every part of the brain. And they play a major role in development. And after you're developed, they play a major role in functioning. And because of this microarchitecture, these core regulatory networks are basically the backbone of our stress response capabilities. And when these systems are activated in extreme or abnormal ways, it alters functioning in all of the areas of the central nervous system and all of the parts of the body that get innervation from these core regulatory networks. The result is that if you have a sensitizing set of experiences, if you have extreme, unpredictable, prolonged activation of these systems, you'll start to get changes in different parts of the body and brain that really compromise function, that increase risk for heart disease, increase risk for diabetes, increase risk for skin problems, increase risk for reading problems, increase risk for difficulties with executive functioning, increase risk for attentional problems. So literally, these core regulatory networks, when they develop normally, when they develop in a smooth and appropriate way, help guide healthy development. But if they get disrupted and impacted by a lot of factors, these are three main big buckets of experiences that will predictably alter these neural networks and lead to increased risk. Any of these things happen, you're going to have issues. And again, part of the neurosequential model is to teach people about some of these things so that they can begin to understand a little bit about the impact of trauma on attachment, on learning, on behavior, and so forth. Now, at the heart of the neurosequential model therapeutics is an assessment process. And that assessment process I talk about, I mentioned it earlier, is kind of divided into a history component and a current functioning component. The history part, as I said before, looks at the nature and the timing of developmental adversities and the nature and the timing of counterbalancing relational health factors. And the unique thing, and one of the unique things about this model, is that when we do an assessment, we literally create a visual map of the brain that helps people understand and see how the brain appears to be organized. So if you go look at our upside down triangle again, what you get is a different variation of function connected to parts of the brain. This is the top part of the brain. Here's a bunch of functions that are related to the top part of the brain, and here's a bunch of functions related to the lower part of the brain. And what we can do is look at how these functions are organized and how they're working currently with an individual, and then compare that to, number one, a fully organized brain, and number two, a cohort of age comparison individuals. And this allows us to create basically a map. And this is an example of a map from somebody who had severe neglect and various kinds of trauma. This is what their brain should look like, and this is what their brain does look like. And green is pretty well organized and approaching adult-like functioning. Red is abnormal, undeveloped. Yellow is emerging and not yet fully organized. And you can see that this 9-year-old child has a brain that basically is about as well organized as a newborn. And again, one of the biggest issues that we run into in developmental trauma is trying to get an accurate understanding of where the child is developmentally, not where they are chronologically. And we use this information to target therapeutic work. Now, I can go on and on about this, and we can talk some more about this when we have some conversation about this. But a couple of things that I want to point out is that when you start using this assessment process to guide your clinical intervention, you end up having much better outcomes because you're actually targeting the systems that are the origin of the problem. And we have published a number of articles about improvements in restraints and critical incidents. We've used this model with a number of specialized populations. It's been studied extensively in Australia and in the United States as a backbone assessment component for the child welfare system with very good outcomes. We've looked at a variety of factors that have to do with what are the meaningful, if you will, protective factors that help individuals who are exposed to chaos, threat, and trauma. And it turns out that early developmental relational health is a huge positive predictor of positive outcomes. In other words, you can have adversity, but if you have connectedness in your life, that can counterbalance this to some degree. And so this model has been used all over the place. You know, as we first manualized this in 2008, and since then, you know, it's spread out to 28 plus countries. We've got several thousand clinicians that use it on a routine basis. We've got multiple countries that have implemented this model. And as time went on, it became clear that you can do really good clinical treatment planning, and the parents can understand the child, but then the child has to go to school. So if the school doesn't understand the child and they view the child through their conventional lenses of, I hate to say it, shaming and blaming, marginalizing and excluding kids that have behavioral problems, and don't recognize that the impulsivity and the inattentiveness may be because a trauma-related alteration in their capacity to pay attention, in their capacity to regulate, you'll end up misdiagnosing, overprescribing, and excluding kids from school. And so we developed the neurosequential model in education. And again, that has spread very significantly, and there have been a number of really, really positive outcomes related to that. Not only outcomes that relate to improvements in decreased referrals to the principal, decreased critical incidents, decreased behavioral problems, but we've also seen significant jumps in academic achievement in classrooms and environments that have brought these concepts into their school. And I'll let Dr. Rankin talk about that a little bit. And then ultimately, part of what we recognized was that, you know, all of this has to be really in the overarching strategy where the adults that provide the relational environment for the child understand these concepts, which means if the parents don't get it, if the after school program people don't get it, if the bus drivers don't get it, if the people that are sort of the normal everyday caregivers don't get it, it's going to lead to mixed messages and ineffective delivery of what we think is going to work based upon an NMT assessment or NME related school-based program and activities. So we've developed and have been piloting in Arizona the neurosequential model in caregiving for the last 4 or 5 years, and Amy will talk about that a little bit. And the reason this is kind of relevant, I think, for the overarching area that we're focusing on in this big group, which is to sort of roll these ideas out into a state, is that in Arizona, the governor's office and the Department of Education have very intentionally bought into bringing this model into these systems. And they've supported different communities and different departments in their funding the capacity building that's related to the neurosequential model. And I think I better stop there, and I don't want to take too much time. And maybe, I don't know, do we want Elaine to talk first, or do we want Amy to jump in and talk about this?
Well, I think that was a great segue to the next question, which is how can the neurosequential model approach be applied across different sectors? And so I wonder, Amy, if you want to start, and then Dr. Rankin could go next.
Okay, sure, that would be great. So yes, thank you, Dr. Perry, for that great introduction regarding, so NMC, the Neurosequential Model in Caregiving, that's our focus over here at the Arizona Council. And as Dr. Perry kind of led us into, is this idea that we needed, the belief was that we needed understanding in all areas of the child's life. And so we really started out with the focus being foster and kinship and adoptive families specifically. But the beauty with the caregiving is it's open to all caregivers, but not just those caregivers, but the individuals that are really working with them as well and providing support to them and those families. So with NMC, the focus has always been from the very beginning on training and getting information out and helping caregivers have a better understanding of all of these pieces that Dr. Perry kind of gave a really very high level introduction to, but helping, because really to us, the idea is helping them make sense of what they're seeing with these kids that they're caring for, helping them look at it a little differently, and then also helping them with how do we actually respond? What do we do in these situations? How do we help these children, and how do we care for them? So from the very beginning, sustainability was a key word. Like, how do we make this sustainable in Arizona? We started with webinars with Dr. Perry, but we also recognized that we could not, continue to bring Dr. Perry in on, forever and ever. So what we also did was we did webinars, and we pulled in caregivers, which I think was really important and was really awesome because it really gave that perspective. So basically these webinars were conversations between Dr. Perry and these caregivers. And interspersed with these slides and this information, this knowledge about, hey, this is what's happening. You're giving me this scenario, this situation, here's what's happening here, which was just phenomenal in helping people get a better understanding. But at the same time, we also really wanted, again, going back to sustainability, we wanted to focus on how do we move this forward? How do we continue this? How do we help this grow around the state? So we started a facilitator training program, and then also what we are currently calling a master trainer program as well. I think some of these terms might change in time, but so we kind of have this level of facilitators who are the ones that can go out and provide training with families. And then we have these master trainers who can train more facilitators within our state. And that's really been the focus. As Dr. Perry said, we started working on this in 2017. And in 2020, we really rolled out the actual facilitator training program. And in that time, we've trained, I think, 73 facilitators. We do have a yeah, and Dr. Perry is correct. Train the trainer is huge. I just noticed the chat popped up. But so these facilitators can we have a standardized curriculum that they can go out and provide to families, to those who are working with these families. And it's very focused, again, around that basic understanding of what's going on, like what's behind all of this. In NMC, we do not use the maps, that's NMT and NME. So we really just focus on the overall understanding of the concepts. Now our facilitators, some of them are out doing this training, but I won't lie, not all of them are doing it. We have about half that are doing it on a pretty regular basis. But what's really awesome is that even the ones that aren't doing that standardized training are still out there having those conversations on a regular basis with those families that they're working with. So they're pulling up a certain slide, they're using the upside down triangle brain, they're still getting those concepts out. And that, I think, is really where it's continuing to grow around the state. And then we have our master trainers who are helping us to continue to train more, which is really fantastic, because then we can just continue to grow it. And I think those are my key highlights, and I want to make sure Dr. Rankin gets a chance to jump in. But
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Basically, I would like to speak with you about how we have applied the neurosequential model across an entire school district in the last 4 years. And we live in a community with very high ACEs, kids with very limited ability to have connectedness, kids living in foster care, adoptive placements, kids living in kinship situations. We have just all of the socioeconomic events that usually lead toward high ACEs in kids. And how we started this was just introducing the core concepts of the neurosequential model the first year, and one of our K-8 schools got very, very excited about the idea of becoming a pilot school. And so we have established a pilot school where kindergarten through 8th grade, most of their teachers are NME certified. We also have NMT trained person or two who can go in and do the larger assessments. And then for the district, over the last couple of years, we've been able to have one of our former administrators trained in the neurosequential model in caregiving. And we're also looking at having a couple of our coaches do the NM in sports. So, you know, with support from the Arizona Governor's Office of Family, Faith, and Friends, we were able to 2 years ago be awarded a huge grant to roll this out over 3 years. And again, the big piece when we talked to Dr. Perry, when we were ready to roll it out, was how do we create that sustainability piece? And it really had to do with getting parents involved, getting interest generated district-wide, but also bringing in those community mental health agencies that our kids are working with, CPS or DCS caseworkers, even our local police department, and having school-based resource officers that understand the core concepts of the neurosequential model. And then this spreads out, you know, from there to the county level and then to the state level. And The other way that people get interested is that they attend a meeting or they come to a tour, or one of us does a training for the Department of Education. And then we have districts across the state who are interested in how we're implementing the model in our classrooms, in our schools, who sign up for tours, who want maybe even just a brief training on core concepts. So over the last 4 years, it's really been remarkable bringing all those aspects of the model into this one particular school district of 1,600 kids in the middle of Arizona.
Awesome.
Thank
And
you.
just so people know, can I, sorry to interrupt, Rachel, but and this is just because I like data. The places that I've been doing this have been tracking outcomes, and Amy, in the NMC project, one of the outcomes is sort of self-awareness, self-reflection on, what have I learned? Did I learn something? Do I feel like I'm more effective? And the data from that is pretty stunning, right? I mean, the number of people that participate in the NMC walk away from even one session feeling like they better understand the kids that they are working with. And the outcomes and again, I haven't seen your outcomes, Elaine, but I know that the outcomes from other NME focused places have really involved a lot of improved behaviors, less teacher turnover, and this is a really hard time for education. And what we found is that in communities that have both NME trained and non-NME trained schools, the NME trained schools have lower turnover, the teachers are less burned out, and what did I say? That the NME schools have less turnover and the teachers are less burned out, and the non-NME schools are struggling. So.
And we see increase in student attendance, and we'll have all that data ready for the state of Arizona by next June and send it to you first to look over, Dr. Perry, and then.
Of course you will.
But we have seen just an exponential increase in students' achievement through the use of this model over 3 years in our pilot school, despite COVID.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm hearing you guys talk, and I find the NMT framework so powerful across sectors. So really thinking about ways our policies, our systems, and then even individual treatments can be based on the science of how trauma impacts both our brains and our bodies, and being really thoughtful about the individual and where their brain is developmentally and how it's been impacted by trauma, such that, for some kids, they may not be able to engage in a trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, because their prefrontal cortex would not really be there. And so they need more body-based or lower brain-based somatic treatments, massage or walking, or you talk a lot about rocking and balance. So really thinking about that child and what their need is, and that you guys think about the timing of the trauma, when the trauma happens makes a difference. And what's really exciting to me too is how much you guys think about the importance of investing in relational health, in safe, stable, and nurturing relationships as both prevention and as healing strategies for kids. And so that leads me to my next question for you guys. And that is, really thinking, because Pathways to Resilience is creating this national forum to create dialogue for states, how states could implement healing-centered and trauma-responsive policies, how they could use the neurobiology that you guys lift up in the NMT model to be more responsive to children and adults who are experiencing trauma. So what is the role that you guys see that states and local governments could play in promoting relational health, healing, and resilience? What could states concretely do? And I'll start with Dr. Perry.
Well, there are a lot of things that I think should be done. One of the things that we're doing, which is sort of has a long-term goal, is encouraging graduate schools to integrate these concepts into their training. So here we are talking about these postgraduate training activities that we're teaching people that are already social workers, already teachers, already, out in the world doing stuff. And we're basically trying to get them to to some degree, undo the way they think. And that's hard. So what we think will be better, and we've had a little success in this, is to start to back these concepts up so that if you become go into law enforcement, you'll understand state-dependent functioning, you'll understand reactivity, you'll understand, the impact of proximity as escalating. You will understand this stuff in ways that will help you become better at what you do and influence the ongoing growth of your own field. And so we think that to the degree that government can play a role in this, that government should support the integration, that bringing these ideas into public education at a graduate level, college level, and ultimately into curricular elements in high school. We think people should learn the quadratic equation. But do you think, honestly, for our society, that it would be better that more people understood attachment or the quadratic equation? That's the kind of debate. I mean, and I'm happy to debate it. We can debate it, but it has to start. We have to start recognizing that there's something very powerful and important about belonging, and that when you feel like you don't belong, it's harder to learn. You're not as physically healthy. You're at greater risk for mental health issues. And all of these things are tied to, why don't you feel like you belong? Well, maybe your skin's not the right color. Maybe you are not the right ethnicity. Maybe you're getting nonverbal signals that you don't belong from the elements of the dominant society. So if we don't start confronting our systemic prejudices and our individual implicit biases, we will not make much progress or traction. And I think this is going to be one of the major impediments in getting government to act on these things, because government is us, and we've got our biases.
Amy and Dr. Rankin, do you have thoughts about what lessons you've learned in Arizona in implementing this approach that could help states follow your lead?
Well, go ahead, Dr. Rankin.
Oh, thank you. I think, again, back to what I was saying about being part of the network and being able to open up our school doors to other districts who are interested in implementing the neurosequential model. I also think that then what happens is student teachers doing their trainings with us take this information back to their professors, and we've now been asked to speak to the College of Education at Northern Arizona University about the core concepts of the neurosequential model. And so bit by bit, these things roll out, but I believe in Arizona because there is so much support through the governor's office and the Arizona Department of Education, and so much collaboration with Dr. Perry, that they've done a beautiful job over the last few years of really supporting this pathway to resilience. Amy?
Yeah, and I do want to highlight, because I did not earlier, but we also received a grant through the Governor's Office of Youth, Faith, and Family in Arizona. So I do want to reiterate how much support we have received from our Governor's Office, which I do think was extremely helpful. But for me, obviously that's a big part of it, and it goes along with collaboration. I mean, that was just a big piece of it. We were reaching out to every entity that we could, anyone who would have conversations with us, who would listen, to help spread the word. We're a pretty big state as well, so getting out to some of the more rural locations and really just having these conversations. And I think the work that was already being done with NMT and NME in the state helped a lot, because we'd be having conversations and then people would say, hey, we know this person up in Cottonwood that's been talking about these things too. So I think that really helped because we were all having these conversations and bringing us together as a group as well. I think for NMC, one thing that we do have for the overall implementation is we have the council as kind of this like the coordinator. For this is specific to NMC, but we have that entity that's been helping to roll it out with other organizations. So as other organizations, can go out and start training their facilitators, they're having those conversations. The council is still that entity that's been able to kind of also, continually to work and keep that group together, but also like, how do we, what's next? Where are we going to go next? How can we continue to grow this? So I think having that as well has been helpful.
And just so people may not know what the council is, but what are you, like 42 organizations or 20? You have a whole bunch, right?
Yeah. So the council, just really quick, we're member-based. So our members are agencies that provide behavioral health, child welfare, or whole person integrated care anywhere around the state. And we actually have over 100 agencies now as members. And so we really started with that membership of how to really kind of roll out this idea of NMC. And it's obviously grown beyond that membership, but that was a big help in getting us started.
Yeah.
I find all of this so powerful. I'm hearing collaboration across agencies, so that sort of relationships and relational health, even on a government and agency and systems level. And then, of course, addressing our implicit biases. And I love your quote, Dr. Perry. I might want to put it up somewhere, but attachment and belonging are more important than the quadratic equation. I think that's really helpful in helping us undo the way we think about these things. So I'm noticing the time, and I want to make sure that we have time for all of you in the Zoom audience to have a chance to answer questions. So you could definitely raise your hand, and then we could, help call on you guys so you could actually speak. I see a question in the chat, so I might start with that one while people start raising their hands. And that is, could you guys present a fictional example of determining the locus and level of development of components of a person's profile and how that would determine the therapeutic response? So a little bit of walking through maybe a case example of how the NMT model works.
You want to do that, Elaine, or I can do it? I can do it. And I'm gonna use slides again, just because it's a little bit easier. And I'll go back and use the I can use the example that I put up earlier. So I think I have in here somewhere where is it? I was showing you this. Was it this one? Yeah. Let me show you this one. This is a map from a 6-year-old child, basically, who was essentially a feral child. This is a child who had no numeracy, no literacy, wasn't toilet trained, didn't know how to use a fork, lots of neglect, lots of abuse. And the year before they came into this place, with the hall, which was using the neurosequential model, they'd been in a really good clinical environment where they were only using, quote, evidence-based practices. So they put this child into trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which I don't know how many of you are actually clinicians out there, but in order to use cognitive behavioral therapy, you really need your cortex to be pretty organized and available to do that work. But you can look at this map right here and see immediately that this is a 6-year-old who has a completely inaccessible cortex. The parts of the brain that are involved in thinking and anticipating and reflecting and all of that stuff, even articulating using words, they're undeveloped. It would be like asking a 6-month-old baby to do TFCBT. It's just ridiculous. So this kid was religiously taken to TFCBT every week for the year preceding admission to this unit. And so, but this child was not given, their whole issue around sensory integration wasn't addressed. All of their touch sensitivity wasn't addressed. Their inability to have regular sleep cycles wasn't addressed. So they were dysregulated. They had absolutely poorly organized lower part of the brain. And so rather than putting them in TFCBT and speech and language and OT and all this stuff that really, they've got, this child had all these problems, but was not yet developmentally ready to address those problems. So this child got very intentional, intensive somatosensory interventions that started with very frequently dosed, but short term activities like rocking and swinging, and then ultimately touch was introduced in a very non-sexualized therapeutic way, like wash your hands, wash my hands, let me wash your hair, all kinds of very simple pattern repetitive somatosensory things. And a year later, this is where the child was. They were ready to start engaging in more parallel play activities. Now, they still were not ready for dyadic stuff, but they could be with other human beings without blowing up. And by using regulating rhythmic things coupled with relational activities, they kind of moved up from focusing on regulation to focusing on regulation and relationships. And then by the time they got here, they were able to basically move into a dyadic relationship and then start using cognitive things to do a little bit more insight-oriented work. So there was a sequential use of different therapeutic approaches that matched where the child was developmentally. And that's sort of an oversimplified version, but that's kind of what I would consider an example of how we do that.
And I find that so helpful because from a plasticity kind of way of thinking, you couldn't practice the piano once a week for an hour and actually improve and be a great pianist. But I heard you say frequent small dosing every day. And so that we really do have to engage the providers, the teachers, everybody in their care plan to be working on this on a daily basis to help kids practice these skills and these somatic therapies and these different interventions to really make them change the brain.
Exactly. And I think, again, Rachel, that's one of the things that sort of permeates this model across all the different sort of versions of there are these core concepts that are very similar, but there's a recognition that the therapeutic change is being provided by this relational milieu, by this relational environment the child's in. And if the people in that environment understand the child and they can be present and they can be regulated and their needs are met, which is a big if, then the journey of the child, the healing journey, is going to be much better.
This is a big question, but there's a question in the chat about, have you worked with CPS caseworkers to help them with children in their care? And I'm thinking about the relational health and connectedness milieu, I can't say that word well, in CPS, and how you might translate this for that sector.
Yeah, and this is like opening a can of worms. I hate to do this, but the reality is I get a chance to talk with the child protective system quite a bit and do some work with caseworkers. But the problem is I'm basically bringing explicit language to their moral injury, because so often they are put in a position to practice social work in a way that they know isn't best for the kid or the family. Instead of being able to spend time with the child, instead of being able to sort of get to understand why this mom's struggling, there are these pressures to sort of check a box and act, and they have a big caseload. And so we put our teachers, our public mental health providers, our early child care providers, and our caseworkers into an environment where we are asking them to do the opposite of what we're teaching them through the neurosequential model. And so it's like a moral injury. And I feel bad sometimes when I talk with folks about this, but it resonates with their own experience. So it's validating, so they know they're not crazy. But the solutions to that are very rarely ones that the supervisors or the system can swallow. I think people should do team casework. I think we should remove kids less frequently. I think that we need to do a better assessment to support parents. I think when we remove a kid and then we target all of our interventions on the kid, we're making a mistake, because we should give the parent the supports so that when they reunify, the parent will be able to help this child. And, you know, I think we need to just reinvent the way we do things. And it's hard to change systems, but I think we have to. So.
I think a little bit along those lines, but well, I guess a little separate. What could non-clinicians do? That was a question in the chat. So if you have thoughts, and I guess that I don't know if Ms. Choi would want to elaborate on your question a little more, but I think a lot of this is for, you know, we're talking about clinicians. What could the non-clinicians do?
Well, Amy and Elaine, I think you both can comment on that.
So yeah, I mean, in NMC, we do, we mostly work with non-clinicians. So we focus a lot on well, first of all, we focus a lot on general understanding and helping people better understand what they're seeing. But then we also focus on what are some things that, how can families and individuals respond in the situation. So I think there are little ways, and I don't know how deep we want to go into that right now, but I think the model does a really good job at giving just some basic understanding. I'm going to go back to number one is regulation, right? So how do we work on regulating, and how do we work on regulating and hopefully build those relationships with these families that we're working with. And everyone that we have are non-clinicians. So as well, not everyone, but a majority of them. And as we are sharing this information with them, because we do have, in Arizona, they're DCS workers, but we do have individuals who work at DCS who are facilitators in an NMC program, and they are very passionate about this, and they believe wholeheartedly that this is great information. And they come back with stories about how they interact with others, you know, at their work in the moment, and provide information and share pieces and ideas for, you know, how can we, you know, improve this situation? What can we do in this situation with this family, with this child? And they come back with these great stories of how these little moments, they were able to kind of impart some of this information to their colleagues. And I think that's been really fantastic. And we definitely have some champions within DCS in Arizona behind this information, or, you know, who really believe in this model.
Dr. Rankin, did you have some additional thoughts for non-clinicians?
Well, I think anyone trained in the neurosequential model in education, for the most part, is a classroom teacher or paraprofessional who are non-clinicians, who are with the kids 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, which is probably more hours than in many cases their parents spend with them. Additionally, what we've been able to do in our community is we've been able to create a neurosequential model in education, neurosequential model based behavior intervention program for a small amount of kids with a history of trauma and adversity. And those kids that are in the system with CPS or DCS, we actually invite the caseworker to come into the classroom. Any meeting that we have, we invite the caseworker to with the parents or with a foster parent or whoever that student is working with. But on both those, to those 2 points, DCS is very burdened, overburdened, and we've been real fortunate with the people working with their kids. And then in addition to that, non-clinician neurosequential network support people with the model of sports, and the caregivers like Amy was talking about is becoming part of our sustainability process.
That's all of that is really, really helpful. And I recognize too, when you guys, even when you learn the neurosequential model, and you learn how to talk to the parents and the providers about this work too. So it becomes very, so it's very, just very open for parents to understand this. So anybody really can use this model and understand it, and then and implement it. Clinicians, parents, caregivers, it's really, really a powerful way of thinking about the brain. So I really appreciate how you guys are describing it across sectors and for all people, states included. And so I want to leave time Oh, sorry, Dr.
I was
Perry.
just going to say, just to add one bit onto that, Rachel, is that one of the, and a lot of people in our system don't know about this, but we have a couple of areas where we're actually working with public systems to help them understand systemic issues from these perspectives, not just individual functioning of a student or individual functioning of a mental health professional, but what are the systemic implications, for, this information? Can this help you think more carefully about when to have meetings, who to have at meetings, what is an appropriate set of what are reasonable regulatory expectations? How do you create a healthier climate in a workplace? And so there are versions of this that will become, if you will, sort of the scaffold within which healthy NM practice can take place. Right now, we're trying to do the neurosequential model work within systems that are kind of messed up. I hate to say it, but a lot of our systems, they'll self-declare that they're trauma-informed because they had a little bit of a workshop or whatever. But then you look at their hiring policies, their leave policies. That's not none of that stuff is trauma-informed, and they treat their individual practitioners as cogs in a wheel. And so we're moving towards a systemic consultation version of this that will help systems, particularly public systems. We have a version that's making corporations richer, which is not exactly what we want to do, but that's what happens when you take a corporation and you teach them these things. They get more productive and more creative, and they love it, and they pay a lot of money to learn this. I wish that our public systems would basically have the same motivation to change, but because change is possible, systems can get better. And my voice is going. Sorry.
I'm noticing the time, and I did want to just leave a space for each of our panelists to give us 1 to 2 concrete steps if they have some key takeaways that they would like to let agencies, frontline staff, states know that they could do in supporting children and families. So I'll start with Dr. Rankin.
I would say just become familiar with the model and reach out to those resources and those people who are available to share the ways in which the model can benefit agencies, communities, parents, children, everything. One of the biggest things I think that happens in my work is that teachers learn self-care. Teachers learn what they're teaching kids. And then the biggest overarching piece, again, is that the neurosequential people involved in the neurosequential model are so relational that they really kind of walk the talk of that connectedness. And that's a powerful piece, I think, in long term and in what communities and agencies need.
Powerful. Amy?
Yeah, I would just say start the conversation. And I think this relates to what Dr. Rankin just said, but it's this idea of just start talking to people about it, start educating yourself, learn more about the model, read some of Dr. Perry's books. The website, the Neurosequential Network website, has a lot of resources and information and even some videos. They're great. And start talking to people about it, find out, identify who those people are, that are just as excited about this as you are. That's how we always have looked at it. And just start talking about it and talk to whoever you can about it.
Thank you. And Dr. Perry, your words of wisdom.
I don't know, as wise, but the one thing I would say is that it's far better for people to learn about the concepts and then think about how you can use these concepts in your work than it is to get any formal training in the model. One of the things that's been most interesting is when we look at outcomes, people, about 1/3 of the progress we see in behavioral improvements and all kinds of other stuff occurs simply by teaching people a few concepts, not because they went through all the other stuff, not because they're using the metrics. So you can become a better teacher, parent, clinician just by understanding a few things about sequential organization of the brain and state-dependent functioning, and just a little bit about the importance of the pattern of stress and how that determines whether you're going to develop resilience or you're going to get become more vulnerable. Just simple things. If you think about them and you think about your work, you'll be able to make lots of progress. And so you don't need to, run out and get all certified and all that kind of stuff. I think, like both Amy and Elaine said, just start the process of learning about some of this stuff, and that should be a good start.
Thank you so much. I recognize that we're at time, so I'm going to turn it over to Jen, Brian. Thank you again, all of the panelists.
Yes, thank you all so much for the rich discussion today. That was very informative and also really interesting to see how these amazing models can be applied in a practical way. I know that's a big focus for us at Pathways to Resilience. So just a reminder that the recording from this webinar will be posted on our website, and we'll also be posting some key takeaways from the event as we have always done. And we also just want to let you know that our next session will take place on October 5th. We'll be looking at the Handle with Care program, as you see here. And in November, we're going to be talking about how to effectively make sure that we're incorporating people with lived experience and their needs and priorities in our work and in developing policy around trauma responsive care. So just wanted to say thanks again to our presenters today, and really appreciate your time and energy that you brought to the session, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.